We start, though, with, yes, a very violent weekend with implications for Houston and the rest of Texas. The FBI is investigating a mass shooting in Austin that left at least 2 dead and 14 injured as a potential act of terrorism that may be a direct response to this weekend's U.S. and Israeli attacks on Iran. A gunman wearing clothes with an Iranian flag design and the words "Property of Allah" opened fire outside Buford's backyard beer garden just before 2 a.m. Sunday. Police killed the shooter. It happened less than 24 hours after the start of the U.S. and Israeli military campaign, which killed Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei. Iran responded by attacking Israel and many other Middle East countries which host U.S. military bases. The Pentagon confirmed Sunday 3 U.S. service members were killed, at least 5 more seriously wounded in a suspected drone attack in Kuwait. President Trump warned to expect more. CNN's reporting hundreds of deaths so far in Iran as well as in Israel, but also deaths in Bahrain, Iraq, Kuwait, Lebanon, and the United Arab Emirates. Congressional Democrats and some Republicans are trying to force votes this week on war powers resolutions they hope will limit U.S. military operations. This new war with Iran has obvious reverberations for Houstonians with ties to the region, any traveling to, from, or through the Middle East, Houstonians in or connected to the oil and gas industry, and of course this all comes on the eve of primary election day Tuesday, so there could be immediate political impacts as well. To discuss those connections, we are joined now by Jordan Blum. He's energy editor at Fortune, and Mark Jones, political science fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
Morning. Thanks for.
Absolutely. And as we discuss Houston and Texas connections to developments in Iran, we welcome you to our conversation as well with questions or comments. You can call or text 713-440-8870, email talk@houstonmatters.org, or comment on our live video stream on Houston Public Media's YouTube channel. Mark, let me start with you. And since a friend asked me this point blank, and I have seen folks on social media express similar concerns, let me just give you this. It's an abrupt question. Are we headed for World War III?
No, we are not headed for World War III. Right now, the conflict is focused principally on Iran and Iranian allies. Iran has a military organization in terms of capacity is relatively weak, and what the United States will be spending the next few weeks doing is degrading that capacity even further. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that this could lead to some destabilization in the Middle East and effectively affecting oil prices. I think we're going to probably talk about that. And that, I think the principal impact here could be economic, as well as there's always the possibility that terrorist activities, small or large, are carried out by Iranian surrogates out across the globe. But in terms of broader conflict, broader war, no. I think one thing that President Trump has been very clear about is that we will not be seeing boots on the ground in Iran or any other country for that matter.
We just heard it described on the Marketplace Morning Report and in the NPR newscast. I guess, in fact, it was Tom Bowman who was making this point while he was in Houston over the weekend, that we've never seen regime change without boots on the ground.
Well, I think the Trump administration, in some ways, with its success in Venezuela, extracting Nicolas Maduro, believes it's found a new recipe for quasi-regime change. That is, it doesn't change the regime, but it neuters it and it makes it less of a political threat to the United States while retaining the people who sort of run the show there, who are more willing to work with the United States. That's a strategy they're also attempting to replicate in Cuba these days.
For a third day now, the U.S. and Israel are bombing Iran, while Iran is bombing several Middle East countries. Congress did not authorize any of this. Some lawmakers are very angry about that. That includes a number of Houston area Democrats, as well as a few Republicans around the country. What does the Constitution say about war powers?
This is a murky area. Now, in theory, the Constitution says that the president needs to have approval for Congress for carrying out war, but executives historically, and this includes Democrats like Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, as well as Republicans, have always stressed that the executive has the ability to act unilaterally. And I think the case the Trump administration will make is that this is effectively an issue of national security. It came up in terms of an opportunity to decapitate the entire leadership, or at least a large portion of the leadership, and they took it.
All right, Jordan Blum, lawmakers may not be happy about this. Have you heard yet from any of the major oil companies here in Greater Houston about how they're reacting to all of this?
Yeah, well, the other side of the coin there is, yeah, this is kind of good for Houston energy producers, oil producers in a way. It boosts prices for them. They're not going to change their habits a whole lot because this is a temporary geopolitical, assumedly, impact. So they're not going to start adding a bunch of drilling rigs or anything, but it means more profits for what they sell in the meantime. So it certainly doesn't hurt Houston. Of course, it will mean higher prices at the pump for at least a period of time.
Is it clear how much higher they could get?
That's the rub, I think. So prices have been rising since the beginning of the year. However, they're coming off of a low point, the lowest since the pandemic. So we had really cheap gasoline for a bit. The oil price is up 25% about since the beginning of the year, including just a almost $5 jump over the weekend, just from the attacks. But it's been slowly rising since the beginning of the year just because of the geopolitical risks with all the Iran tension.
While the U.S. is much more energy independent than it once was, I would have to think this does create a degree of doubt about how much Middle East oil supply is going to find its way to the rest of the world, at least for a time. Among the things we've already learned, Qatar Energy has stopped its production of LNG. What are the potential immediate impacts here in Houston and across Texas should we see Middle East oil supply, LNG, other products dry up, or other spots around the world?
Yeah, it's definitely a bigger impact in Europe and Asia than it is here. Granted, like I said, prices will continue to rise at the pump. You know, the Houston average is about 250 right now. It'll keep going up. The national average will go up over $3. Don't buy gas by the Galleria or River Oaks. That's that premium area where you'll be paying over $3 locally. But natural gas wise, yeah, we keep talking about oil. It's a big issue with natural gas too. Like you said, with Qatar cutting off its supplies. It's the second largest natural gas exporter in the world after the U.S. Because we have so much domestic supply, it's only going to have a small price increase or modest price increase here. But yeah, for the European and Asian countries that are dependent on it, it's starting to spike already a lot, especially in those countries where it's still wintry weather and they need that for heating.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. We're discussing some of the impacts this weekend's military actions in Iran spreading to other Middle East countries, maybe having here in Houston, across Texas, and elsewhere. We welcome your thoughts at 713-440-8870 or talk@houstonmatters.org. You can also post a comment on our live video feed on Houston Public Media's YouTube channel. Mark Jones, this comes on the eve of primary election day here in Texas. While many folks vote early, what effect could you anticipate that this might have tomorrow?
I don't think it'll have much effect on the Republican side of things, in that we already were seeing a Republican primary electorate that was pretty much the standard group with a slight addition of non-regular voters. I think if we're going to see an impact anywhere, it's going to be on the Democratic side, where Democratic opposition to the Trump administration's policies overall, but in regard to foreign policy and in regard to Iran, is much greater. On the Republican side, that there's supporters and there are people who are a little reticent about this essentially move towards what they might view as nation building, which President Trump said he was not going to engage in this term, but appears to be the case, at least in Venezuela and Iran. But overall, I wouldn't expect this to have too much of an impact on turnout. And if it does, it would probably spike or boost turnout a little bit on the Democratic side.
There are, though, I would imagine, some conservatives who took the phrase America first to mean non-intervention in other countries. And then the suggestion was, well, after the action in Venezuela, well, this is only interest in protecting the Western Hemisphere. We're going to leave the Eastern Hemisphere alone. Well, now there's action in the Eastern Hemisphere. Is there just a fundamental misunderstanding of what President Trump has meant by that all along, or has his approach changed?
I think it's his approach has changed. I mean, the President Trump who was elected in 2024 ran on a platform of non-intervention, that the United States was not going to get involved in foreign entanglements, and if it did, it would be mostly here in the Western Hemisphere. This type of attack, this type of use of the U.S. military was something the Trump administration would not engage in. In fact, his administration is peppered with officials who were very critical, many of whom served in Iraq, and are very critical of the U.S. involvement in the Middle East. So this is something I think where President Trump is going to have some work to do convincing his base that this was a necessary action. Now, once again, like with Venezuela, and in some ways I think we're victims of the Trump administration's tremendous success in Venezuela. That is, it went in, it decapitated and removed the leader of a major country, and did so with virtually no loss of life to any Americans, soldiers. That, I think, has emboldened the president to try to extend the strategy to Iran, but that's going to be much more complicated. And we're really in a situation, I think, of wait and see of how long does this go. I think Trump's preference is that it's sort of a one and done. He gets in, he was able to negotiate something with the Iranian government or whoever is essentially the new leadership, and then effectively stop the attacks and return to business as usual.
We have a couple of questions. This first one really applies to both of you. I'll ask Mark, you first on the political front here. The question is, are there any concerns about a power vacuum destabilizing Iran even further?
Well, that's a real risk. That is, when you're engaged in these activities, one option is that you're able to effectively have some new leaders that are willing to work with you. The other is that everything collapses and fragments, and that leads to an Iranian government that is no longer controls the entire country. Israel has long pushed for that sort of status quo in Iran, where it's with its support for the Kurds in the north, with the idea that a destabilized Iran is actually a good thing for Israel. I don't think the United States wants that. I think they want a more compliant regime in Tehran that effectively is willing to work with the United States and no longer is saying death to America and death to Israel all the time.
In a way, Jordan, is destabilization the default experience for the energy industry?
I mean, they're definitely used to it, but if chaos really ensues, things get out of hand. I mean, the energy producers still don't want oil to go too high because that's when demand destruction sets in. So, with oil right now, the U.S. benchmark a little over $70. That's kind of a sweet, healthy spot for profits. If things escalate further and a desperate Iran starts really striking with everything they have at, their neighbors and oil production and oil exports, then, you do get chaos and the oil price could jump above $100 a barrel. You could see gasoline prices go well over $4. And, that's when things hit the metaphorical fan, so to speak.
Mark, Billy wants to know what happened to the Board of Peace.
I think that was an invention for a very short moment, and now it's no longer relevant. That's one of the many, I think that's one of the Trump strategies of creating deflection, getting people focused on something, and then moving completely on.
We should also talk about security. Governor Abbott over the weekend indicated efforts were underway to step up security across Texas, around industrial plants, along the border, places that might potentially be vulnerable to a terrorist attack. And yet, what did we see? Within a day, a mass shooting outside a bar just a few miles from the UT campus in Austin. Are there limits to how much elected officials can prepare for where or when such things can happen?
Right, especially these types of lone wolf attacks are very difficult to spot and prevent. I think what the governor is doing is very responsible. He's trying to make sure that he's at least doing everything in his power to safeguard, whether it's strategic facilities, watching the border, so that at the end of the day, he knows that he's done all he can to try to prevent any attacks. But especially with these lone wolf attacks, they're almost impossible to prevent. And really, it's more trying to limit the damage that they cause.
Jordan, can we anticipate the energy industry is thinking about stepped up security, including cybersecurity right now?
That's always a concern. I mean, they've over the last few years, they've really stepped up cybersecurity spending. It's become a big issue. There have been some pipeline shutdowns over the last few years from cybersecurity issues. So it's something they're aware of.
A lot of companies here also have employees in various Mideast nations, some of which are being bombed by Iran. Others may find travel becomes more hazardous or not possible for a time. What should those employees and their families prepare for here?
Yeah, they probably should not be traveling right now. So yeah, I mean there might be some shelter in place orders depending on where they are within the Gulf states. But I think there's not too much to worry about yet. But of course, escalation could change everything.
Are there particular companies here in Houston that may see the most significant impacts here, just in terms of how much business they do with certain nations?
Well, there's the biggest ones, of course, the Exxon, Chevrons that do the most business. Then you have the services companies that are very involved, like the Halliburtons, the SLBs, formerly Schlumberger, Baker Hughes, those that have a lot of boots on the ground.
You also mentioned the potential for oil prices to rise substantially. If that were to come to pass, or if this became a protracted military campaign, could we see a push for rapid increases in domestic oil production, or do we already have plenty of supply?
There's quite a bit of supply already, but yeah, if it truly became a protracted thing that, the Middle East is going to be destabilized for some time, then yes, U.S. production would ramp up, but it's not gonna be like a light switch turning off on and off. And U.S. production already is near all-time highs, hit all-time highs late last year, and it's just down slightly from that. So the U.S. is cranking out quite a lot of oil right now.
As I mentioned, there's always been volatility in energy markets. How would you characterize this moment compared to past periods of such volatility?
Well, it's exceeded bombing Iran last year when it was kind of a brief hiccup, but it's not anywhere near the Iraq invasion. It's not even near Russia invading Ukraine yet. That's the last time oil prices spiked well above $100 a barrel. And there was a lot of pipelines taken out, and really we had to kind of change the global logistics of oil supply chains that took some time. Oil prices have been coming down since then slowly. So we'll see if things start to turn around more dramatically in the other direction.
Mark, what do you see ultimately as the political fallout from what's happened over the last 72 hours and what may happen in the coming days and weeks?
Well, I think a lot depends on how successful this is. If the Trump administration is able to achieve its goal of a neutered Iran that's willing to work with the Trump administration, and oil production and particularly and shipping out of the Straits of Hormuz is opened up and out of the Gulf, then it's probably not much of a negative impact as we move towards November. I don't see much of a positive impact, but it won't be negative. On the other hand, though, if this results in continued conflict, rising inflation, and a belief that the Trump administration has gotten the country involved in another foreign entanglement, then that can only hurt Republicans at the polls in November of 2026. And I think there are probably a lot of Republican elected officials out there who look at this attack, and while they may agree in theory with some of the efforts to effectively remove this longtime enemy of the United States from being an active threat, they also have to be worried about the consequences of this for the November elections, particularly holding key Senate seats in places like Maine and North Carolina and even Texas and Iowa, as well as trying to flip seats in Michigan and Georgia. So I think Republicans are probably pretty worried about what the negative effects can be. There isn't much of an upside for the elections in November of 2026, but there's quite a bit of downside if things go south.
We have one other question really for both of you and maybe for me too. Brandon wants to know what's the best way to stay up to date with accurate and truthful information coming from the region. The administration has not been the most honest with their output, Brandon writes. And I guess what I would say just right off the bat, of course, I'm going to mention NPR.org, BBC as a potential resource, and the Associated Press as good examples. And I imagine that you would also mention Fortune as one potential source. Anything else either one of you would suggest in terms of how to be able to suss out accurate information from misinformation in the midst of this?
I think one good piece of advice, and this applies to pretty much all news, is try to triangulate, get multiple sources from different. If you have multiple sources from different sort of outlets saying the same thing, that gives you, I think, a high level of confidence that it's actually true. If you're not finding, if you have outlets that are not in the sort of same ballpark, but are sort of and are occupying different spaces, then that tells you that maybe one side you need to do a little more research because one side is perhaps not having the same vision as the other.
Jordan, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, take everything you see on social media with a big grain of salt, of course. Don't trust what you see on X or Facebook, especially with all the AI manipulated videos. You know, people have been retweeting. Governor Abbott was retweeting or re-Xing, stuff from a video game that he thought was footage of the U.S. shooting down Iranian planes. So, verify, please, and go with trusted media sources.
Jordan Blum is energy editor at Fortune. Mark Jones is a political science fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Thank you both very much.
Thanks, Craig.